once we acknowledge that our economy is simply a series of political choices that we make, let's talk about the other vision of what an economy we could measure a good economy by, or what the goal could be.
Yeah, in the sort of second half of the book, I have a number of proposals. We probably don't have time to go through all of them right now, but
that's why people got to read the book.
Yeah. Order from your preferred literature distribution facility. I think maybe an interesting one that Americans aren't quite as well versed in. I talk about Medicare for all. That's a pretty prominent idea. But I have a reworked and updated version of my paper that I wrote for Matt Bruenig called the leisure agenda. And so, I just point out that Americans work more compared to the wealth of our economy than any other country in the world. So obviously a lot of poorer countries work more hours than Americans do. But if you sort of plot a chart of hours worked versus wealth, America will be the farthest from the trend line, so to speak. And concretely, if we worked as much as I think Germans are in last place, the laziest country on earth, work the least hours on average, we would have something like 11 and a half weeks of extra vacation every year. So that's a very substantial amount of vacation. And, you look at the history of this, you get into the OECD statistics, and you go back to 1970, America was about average compared to peer countries in Europe, Sweden, Denmark, France, Germany. And what happened over the years, the last 50 years, basically, is that all of those countries decided to work less. They put in a mandatory paid vacation days for all regular employees. They got paid sick leave, and they got more of it, and they got paid maternity leave, and they add in more bank holidays. And it was essentially a choice to take the wealth that they were accumulating through the process of economic growth and take some of that, not in the form of more money, but just in terms of more time, more free time to basically, if you go to Europe in July, all of Northern Europe empties out, and they go down to Greece and Italy, and just to have a good time, because it's what's the point of being rich if you can't enjoy it? And America just didn't do any of those things. And so while all their trend lines were going down since 1970s, USA is just flat. We're working about the same as we were back in 1970, even though, we're about something like twice as rich. And it's why? There's a culture of overwork that penetrates way, way up into the income ladder. Some of the people who work the most hours are some of the wealthiest people. Wall Street bankers or Silicon Valley tech guys, they're video game developers or software engineers and stuff. Some of these people work crazy hours. And this is a political choice. This is something that we could get rid of if we just, change the way that the laws worked and made it, enforced things like a 37 and a half hour work week, a mandatory overtime pay for, people who do more than 40 hours or 37 and a half. There's a whole menu of options I lay out in there. And I think it speaks to the, just sort of the way that, you need to kind of stay on top of things. You got to update your economy, not just be dealing with, sort of a leisure time, a beta test or whatever from back in 1970, because, then you're just piling up money that you never even get to spend.
When you make that comparison with Germany, where if we worked commensurate with our I guess our wealth as a nation, if we worked what they did, we got to their sort of dynamic, I guess we would have 12 weeks of vacation, which sounds very, very enticing to me. What is that? Are you measuring? Is that productivity relative to GDP? I mean, what is
that particular comparison? That's just hours. We work like 50 something hours on average. You take hours worked divided by the number of workers, and Germany works about 500 hours less than that. The way to measure, I think, productivity in this context would be GDP per hour worked. So you're not just like USA is much richer, but in terms of GDP per capita than most European countries, not Norway because they have a lot of oil. But then if you account for hours, basically among major economies that aren't distorted by like resource rents, like Norway, which is like cutting edge rich and then has a bunch of oil money on top of that. So they're just insanely wealthy. USA, Germany, and France are like the cutting edge, the most productive economies. And so that I think is a fair representation of where we would go if we were sort of following the trend of countries with comparably productive economies. We would be working that much, like about 500 hours less per year.
And that's we should say that's right. No, but that's really about redistributing the wealth, right? I mean, it's basically like saying, we've got some cash hoarders in this country who are sitting on a tremendous amount of the wealth, and therefore, as a worker in the United States, we need to get more money to pay for just some basic stuff that in these countries they don't have to pay for, right? Like, I mean, healthcare and pre-K or daycare, or there's a whole host of different things that the government is paying for by redistributing more aggressively the wealth that they accumulate as a country.
Yeah, I would say specifically with the leisure time stuff, what you're talking about is not creating the wealth at all. So you're just working less and having less production and having just like more free time. And that, I mean, in a sense, you could say that's wealth. I mean, what's the most valuable thing? What's the thing that nobody could ever make more of ever? Time. You're going to live as long as you're going to live, and there's nothing you could do about that. In terms of like, making more minutes in the day. But yeah, no, as far as the rest of it, you're absolutely right. You look at the tax level in this country, we're something like, 20 percentage points below, the Nordic countries or France. Germany is a little bit below the sort of leaders in that respect. And yeah, their resources are collectively harnessed in a way to provide those things that in the United States, people have to either pay for out of pocket or go without. And you're exactly right. Childcare, healthcare is the big one. And we could get into that if you want. We pay so much for that in taxes, and then a bunch more money on top of that in private payments. Child allowance, pensions for retired folks. The panoply of basic welfare state stuff, and that it does. I mean, especially because the economies are so much more equal, especially in the Nordics. That means taxing not only the rich but also the middle class and the working class. People have to pay. They just get taxed like crazy over there. You got your VAT, you got your payroll tax on the employer side and the worker side, all kinds of stuff. But the thinking is, and the reality is, you're getting that money back. It's one point or another. I mean, unless you're some kind of business titan. There's a great tweet from the @Sweden Twitter account that I refer to every now and then, from this fella who, they give it to a random Swede every now and then, which seems kind of crazy to me, but I guess that it works for them. And there's a guy taking pictures of his birthday. Him and his wife had triplets. And it was very, it's expensive. delivery, they end up being in the hospital for like a month, and he's sitting there holding his 3 babies on his chest, and he was talking about, I realized at this point I was getting back every krona I ever paid in taxes and then some. And that's the dream, that like that you pay what you pay what you can, in proportion to your income, and then when you need help, the government's there to catch you. And it's just like a much more safe and secure and, dare I say, free way to live.
Right. I mean, that is, in that instance, it's insurance, right? I mean, It's an insurance that that if you deal with an extraordinary, which happens to people every day, event, it's not going to destroy your life. You're going to be able to just deal with the actual event itself, not the expense. And then on a daily basis, your quality of life is just better because, I mean, one of the things that's not only better about, let's say a single payer type of healthcare situation is not just that you're not paying exorbitant fees, you're paying a little bit less, so you're paying it out in higher taxes, but it's also just a system that is meant to actually deliver the service without making you jump through hoops and, spend, like, those are the hours that you never get back. Like, how am I going to pay for my kids' dental stuff? Well, it's going to involve forms in triplicate, and I filled out that one wrong, so I got to get it back. And this, that's the quality of life is also a big bonus as well. Whether you're getting the dollars back, which inevitably will happen, but in the meantime, the process itself is much better.
Absolutely. Yeah, this maybe is the most underrated argument for universal healthcare, especially. I mean, we're all familiar with just the hell of bureaucracy you are in for if you ever need medical treatment for anything. Even if you have good insurance, you got to have your card. You got to go to the waiting area. You got to pay your copay, your co-insurance. Later on, you might get a bill, for some probably illegal, balance procedure. They recently issued some regulations about that, by the way, but there's a lot of holes in them. But, fighting with the insurance company over the phone or fighting with the doctor over the phone, over like who's going to take the hit for this massive, thing, that whatever it was, and just the worry that creates among everybody. I remember reading an article from a couple of years ago about a woman in Boston who fell between the local, MARTA, the train system up there in Boston, fell between the platform and the train, and it like crushed her leg and like cut it down to the bone. Just horrible injury. And people like pushed the train to the side and they got her out of there. And then she's crying, saying, "Don't call an ambulance. I can't afford it." I mean, that just the people got this in the back of their head, I think, a lot of the time, even if you're not, really, even if you have good insurance, you worry because it's logical to worry that you're just going to be just rooked. You're going to be taken for all you got, possibly, if you get very sick. And to just know that it's there, and you don't have to do anything to access it, like a friend of mine was in Britain one time and got, was very sick, sort of delirious with fever, and took an ambulance ride to the hospital. And she was asking when, they're sort of like bundling her out of there into the urgent clinic or whatever it was, she was like, "What do I pay for it?" And they looked at her like, "Oh, honey, we don't do that here." That just, I mean, it's disgusting. It's uncivilized, you might say. And the amount of, unpaid work that we all have to do to become amateur insurance adjusters and amateur legislative specialists, if you're on Obamacare, so you can know exactly which plan that you should be picking, because it's not obvious. It's an incredible hassle. And it's, like I would pay another 10 points in taxes to just not have to deal with any of that stuff.
Oh my God. Absolutely. I mean, when you have a piece of legislation And one of the major aspects is the creation of a navigator, a core of literally of navigators. Like maybe this thing is a little bit too tricky. Like you need people to actually literally be in charge of helping you figure out how you're going to get health insurance. It's just bizarre to me.